Now I'd like to introduce our speaker today, who's going to, Dr. Thomas Wlikins, who's going to speak on assessing Australia's bargaining power in the US alliance at a time of regional power shift, looking at assets versus liabilities. Dr. Wlikins, Senior Lecturer in International Security at Sydney University and Senior Visiting Fellow at Japan Institute for International Affairs. He received his PhD from the University of Birmingham in the UK, completed his postdoctoral studies at the University of San Francisco and East West Centre, Honolulu. He's been the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the Taiwan Fellow at the Taiwan National University, the Japan Foundation and the Japanese Studies Fellow, the Japanese Society for Promotion of Science and Research Fellow both at the University of Tokyo and visiting Associate Professor at the University of Hong Kong and at Keio University. And you're going to say to me, what university hasn't he been at? He certainly had a very wide experience. He specialises in security issues in Asia Pacific region and has published in the Review of International Studies, the International Relations of the Asia Pacific and Australian Journal of International Affairs, and his 2019 book, Security in Asia Pacific, The Dynamics of Alignment, was published earlier this year. He's also an associate editor for the Journal of Pacific Affairs and the area editor for Japanese Studies. So would you please welcome to the podium Dr. Thomas Wlikins.
Well, thank you, General, for that extremely kind introduction, and sorry for giving you so many tongue-twisting appointments and titles. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you for Ken for reaching out to me and giving me this opportunity to share some of my latest research work with you. So I know that about a year ago you had one of my colleagues, Professor Curran, come to speak to you on a quite a similar topic. I saw that on the podcast on the website. And so some of what I'm going to talk about today actually follows on a little bit from that, but sort of takes a slightly different perspective. So the way I'm going to approach today's talk, there's much discussion of this concept of hybrid warfare. Well, this is going to be a sort of a hybrid presentation because I've got some PowerPoint slides, but I've also got a paper which I'll refer to in the middle and read some of that out to you. So I shall try to stick to my time limit of 45 minutes. Somebody please give me a warning if I start to trespass on that. The title was Assessing Australia's Bargaining Power in the US Alliance at a time of regional power shift. But also in a time of political transition with the advent of the Donald Trump administration has clearly created a number of challenges for the ANZUS Alliance going forward. So I'm going to look at as much at that aspect as well as the sort of structural power shifts that are going on in the background with the rise of China and the relative decline of the United States. Could I have the next slide, please, General? Thank you. So just give you a little bit of background on this. I've been engaged by the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan, one of Japan's think tanks, to work on this project, US Allies Balance Sheet. And so this was kind of the genesis for the paper and the talk that I'm giving today. But prior to that, I wrote my PhD on alliances and coalition warfare, which is why I got into this topic of looking at alliance relations, alignment dynamics and so forth. Which you can see in the latest book, and I've just provided the library here with a copy of this book, so you're more than welcome to refer to that if the inclination strikes you. Now, I've been working on this topic of the changing nature of alliances and alignment in the Indo-Pacific, and I've written a number of things on this, and my argument is that these traditional alliances that were created during the Cold War, like NATO, the US alliance with Japan and Korea, and also the ANZUS alliance, are being kind of transformed from within and from without. And a whole new range of new security alignments are also developing, which I'll shed a bit of light on in this talk as well. So basically, the General has already provided you with some of my professional background, but I spent time in the United States, and obviously in Australia, and also Japan more recently. So those are the kind of the areas that I'm interested in. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay. So this is the plan for today's talk. So firstly, just give a bit of an introduction and set the context for the discussion of the Australia-US alliance. Then the main talk has kind of two parts, which is based upon the structure of the article I'm writing for the journal, Security Challenges, and a version of which I hope to contribute to the RUSI journal as well. So the first part is to look at the Australia-US alliance. We could say ANZUS, but since New Zealand was sort of excluded from ANZUS in the 1980s, it's very much become a bilateral arrangement de facto. So the idea is to apply a ledger or a balance sheet framework to analyse the strengths and weaknesses, or the assets and liabilities that Australia holds in dealing with its superpower US ally. So that's the first part. We look at that and we look at the ledger. And then the second part is to see how this ledger has been forced to change under the Trump administration, which has a very, very different approach to alliances, and also with the background context of the regional power shift that's underway with the rise of China and the relative decline of the United States. And then I'll just finish up with some conclusions and implications going forward. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so I don't need to tell you about the background of ANZUS, you're all familiar with that, but the original purpose of ANZUS was aimed at research in Japan, and then later shifted to an alliance that was aimed at limiting the spread of Soviet or Chinese-inspired communism, especially in Southeast Asia. But after the Cold War, the alliance essentially became threatless after the Soviet Union imploded. The major strategic threat for the alliance was eliminated. That was fairly rapidly afterwards replaced by the war on terror and a focus on Islamic terrorist organisations, Al-Qaeda and so forth. But more recently, there's been talk of this, the purpose of the alliance shifting towards countering the rise of China. If not so specifically, rather casting the purpose of the alliance as upholding the rules-based international order. An alliance that champions a certain set of values, democracy, international law, free trade, human rights and so forth. So this is now sort of not an alliance that is negative and against something, but rather an alliance that is for a positive set of values, which of course some other countries within the region that are gaining in strength and assertiveness don't necessarily share. And so you can very much see this under this buzzword, free and open Indo-Pacific. This is the kind of the policy framework or scaffolding for the alliance's primary activities. In 2017, the Australian Foreign Policy White Paper was released. And this basically committed Australia more than ever to its alliance relationship with the United States, doubling down in the words of Peter Jennings and other strategic commentators. So Australia would increase its contribution to the alliance, would up its defence spending, and increase its integration and interoperability with the US alliance, and deepen its reliance upon the alliance for its national security and defence. At the same time, Australia has complemented the bilateral alliance relationship with the United States with a closer special strategic partnership with Japan, another key US ally. And arguably I would say that both Canberra and Tokyo are now perhaps what might be deemed core allies within the US alliance system, cooperating with an intensity and an enthusiasm that you simply don't see among perhaps Thailand or South Korea, which are now becoming more peripheral to the US strategic presence in the Asia Pacific. So Australia and Japan have created their own bilateral security alignment, not specifically an alliance, but a very, very close security relationship, which is quite a revolution for both countries. And then they triangulate this again through the trilateral strategic dialogue with the United States, as I said, building this kind of trilateral core at the centre of the US hub and spoke system. And this has led commentators to start advocating for a more formalised alliance with Japan, but there's a number of issues to that which we could perhaps go into later if anyone wants to come back to it. So even at the time that the US alliance system, the hub and spoke system or San Francisco system is under duress, both from within because of the presidency of Donald Trump and his treatment and perception of traditional US allies, and from without, from a rising China, this puts Canberra in a difficult predicament, as it does other US allies. So this was a kind of the motivator for carrying out this study. And of course, as people like Professor Curran have talked to you before about this, the whole US alliance relationship in Australia is under intense scrutiny and debate. And we've got a number of high-profile critics of the US alliance that argue for moving away from Washington, led by Donald Trump, and towards more accommodation with China in some instances, such as the late Malcolm Fraser and Bob Carr, Gareth Evans, and Hugh White, and his famous argument about the China choice. And a lot of these debates have been going on, especially within the confines of the strategic community, blogging community, the lobby interpreter, and the ASTI strategist, and so forth. Next slide, please. So that's the background. So here's the core of my argument, which is not to do a cost-benefit analysis of the value of the US alliance to Australia, which has typically been the way. Let's look at the US alliance, what does Australia get out of it, what are the plus points, what are the minus points, and inevitably conclude that even if there's a few downsides, that the US alliance is crucial to Australia's national security. So that's all been done before, and it's pretty much woven into a lot of the debates around this topic. But rather, what I wanted to do was to look at how we could measure Canberra's strengths and weaknesses, what I call its assets and liabilities, in its intra-alliance bargaining with the United States. That is, if Canberra finds itself in what we call a bargaining encounter, an instance where Australia wants to assert a certain position or a certain policy, or respond to an American one. What are the props of its ability to influence US policies, policies in these bargaining encounters? What are what's the scorecard of what Australia can put forward, and the things that Australia needs to have in mind in terms of protecting some of its liabilities. It's originally aimed as a policy relevant analysis from which policy recommendations or prescriptions could be drawn, and to assist Canberra in defending and advancing its national interests, not only through the alliance mechanism, but within the alliance itself. So I suppose the implicit question of this is also, why does the United States value Australia? What are the things that, when Washington Washington looks at Australia, they think, yes, you can do these various things for us, or this is a strong point. And how can Canberra exploit this? So basically just sort of created a column of assets and liabilities. I won't bore you with the sort of the theoretical underpinnings of this from the international relations literature, but rather just the output of the balance sheet or ledger of assets and liability. There's a good reason to try and keep this simple and just simply put it in these columns of assets and liabilities. But one of the problems with this is a lot of people ask me, well, can you rank these in order of significance? What are the strongest assets? What are the weakest assets? What are the worst liabilities? What are the more limited liabilities? There's a few problems in that because actually, as you'll see on the table to follow, that a lot of these, what I've identified as assets and liabilities in sort of separate compartments, they're actually sort of interconnected with one another, or they have to balance one another out or something, or they could be situational. So in one context, this asset may be particularly powerful, in another, not so useful. So that's a little bit of a difficulty that we need to bear in mind. Thank you. Okay, so this is the what should we call this? The standard, or the basic ledger of Australia's bargaining position. So if I asked you, could you take a little note down and say, what are the strong points that Australia has? What are the things that the US values? These are the sort of things that you might come up with. At least this is what I came up with in discussion with other colleagues. I'm happy to hear any comments or additions or and so forth in the Q&A. So I'll try and I just want to be a bit cautious about my time, but I think I have time just to sort of sketch in a little bit on these and tell you what I mean by these, because they're simply one word or several word headings. So I'll go through the assets just briefly to sort of conjure up what I mean by loyalty. So by loyalty, I mean an unbroken record of military and diplomatic support for Washington. Australia has fought alongside the United States in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq a couple of times, the War on Terror, and so forth. So Australia is seen by the United States as an ally that is willing to pay the blood price. It's a reliable partner. It's also has a reputation as a good international citizen. So getting Australia to support your positions can bestow international legitimacy, for example, on United States actions. So that's what I mean by loyalty or track record, and this is something that that Australian politicians and diplomats have invested an enormous amount into this asset and consider it to be perhaps one of the strongest assets that Australia has. And we'll see how this might change under the Trump administration. Secondly is Australia's military contribution. Australia may only be a middle power, but it has small but high-end military forces, RMA-capable military forces, expeditionary orientated, highly interoperable with the United States, and so the ADF is an extremely valuable and capable coalition partner for the United States, something that they also highly value. Also, of course, we have a number of joint facilities, most notably the Joint Defence Facility at Pine Gap, but also now, more recently, hosting rotational presence of the US Marine Air Ground Task Force in the Northern Territory. So these are also things that the United States values that Australia can bring to the table when it bargains with Washington. Thirdly, defence and economic collaboration. So Australia is obviously a major customer for US military hardware. Got the Abrams battle tank, F-18s, and of course more recently the Joint Strike Fighter, and a whole bunch of other systems or platforms that Australia is investing in. So the fact that Australia, according to some calculations, 60% of its defence acquisitions are sourced from the United States, and Australia spends 13 million Australian dollars per working day with US defence industries. That should give them a little bit of leverage amongst, on these major defence corporations in the United States, which of course should translate into lobbying and influence on Capitol Hill. Just as a little addendum to that, excuse me, the aspect of economic cooperation is something that under Prime Minister Howard and the bilateral free trade agreement was something that was supposed to be sort of expanding the bases of the alliance. Was another important aspect to this, and there's a lot of commentators in the United States that want to see more economic cooperation or penetration in Australia by American businesses. Okay, number 4, regional networking. This is something that Australia has taken upon itself in terms of assisting the United States in joining up or networking the individual spokes of its hub and spoke system, like Japan but others, and helping to build these into more of a network or connect the spokes. So just to alight upon Japan, which is the most important of these, the Joint Declaration on Security Cooperation in 2007 built this strategic partnership between Australia and Japan, and this was very much done with the blessing of Washington. It wants its spokes, its individual isolated bilateral allies to cooperate more, to buttress the American alliance system as it faces challenges. And again, you see this through the trilateral strategic dialogue. Less formally, you also see Australia playing an important role in Southeast Asia in terms of networking with ASEAN countries and through the five-power defence arrangement, for example. In 2018, we had the Australia-ASEAN Special Summit meeting. These are all things that you could perhaps argue that Australia puts forth some American positions or American favourable positions forward by proxy. So, the networking aspect. Fifthly, convergent threat perceptions. During the Cold War, and right up to the War on Terror, Australia and the United States have had very much symmetrical perceptions of threat. Even in a period where after the Cold War, a major strategic threat disappeared, there was still an Australian commitment to upholding American primacy and upholding a regional order with the United States at the centre of it. But more recently, there's been a bit of a shift in terms of how the alliance behaves. So, as I said at the beginning, it's more now an advocate for a certain type of regional order, a rules-based international order, and therefore would resist challenges to that order, such as North Korea, Russia, or China, and other disruptive state or non-state actors. Quickly, number 6. Ideological or domestic compatibility. So, every time you look at relations between the US and Australia, you look at the sort of the compatibility of their domestic political systems, Anglo-Saxon dominated cultures, and all of the deep people-to-people linkages and connections between military, public, politicians, and specific alliance managers, either based in Australia or the United States, and the strong domestic support that the alliance enjoys in Australia should be a strength, as well as obviously bipartisan political support. Right. So this is the plus side of the ledger. These are all the advantages that Australia can leverage when it bargains with the United States, typically speaking. And just quickly to go over the liabilities. So, of course, the big problem is that the United States is a superpower and Australia is a middle power. to the United States, Australia is a small ally, right? So the disparity in aggregate power, in economic power, military power, and so forth, and global power is striking. So how does a small ally manage to make itself heard in the corridors of power in a superpower ally that has many allies and relationships? Well, not only is there a material disparity in the relative strength of powers. Normally if the powers were relatively equal, they would supposedly have relatively equal bargaining power, but that's not the case in Australia and the United States. But this is actually made worse by a couple of things, because Australia doesn't enjoy an unequivocal security guarantee from the United States, like that Article 5 of NATO. The ANZUS Treaty, as I'm sure you're all well aware, uses much more, understated languages, consult to meet the common danger or something similar. And so, Australia always fears that it might be abandoned by the United States. And so this perhaps creates a tendency towards a more supplicant position towards the United States. Reinforcing that power asymmetry as well is the absence of a formal infrastructure of alliance. So other than the ANZUS Treaty itself and the bilateral Osmin consultations, there's no kind of central command, joint headquarters like NATO, and no actual formalised alliance structure within which the relationship can occur. And we'll see why this is becoming an increasing problem. Okay, secondly, path dependency and sunk costs. Well, because of what Professor Curran talked about in his own speech about this sort of sentimentalism towards the United States, in Australia, the need to pay the premium of the alliance as an insurance policy, then Washington can often take Australia for granted. Just assume, well, you've always said yes in the past, we can't conceive of you saying no in the future. And so this actually means that Australia forgoes some of its potential negotiating power. Also, of course, as well as the fact that Australia is so dependent upon the United States and locked into the US military-industrial complex, it also creates some risks for Australia because of this sort of inseparability from the US alliance, that it could be entrapped in future conflicts that the US is involved in or initiates that are not necessarily in its national interests. So this is the sort of, the dependent ally argument. Then lastly, of course, this is something that has just come into sharper and sharper relief over the last decade or so, is the way that Australia is in a situation of what we call complex economic interdependence with China. So because of its economic interests and the fact that economics are being seen increasingly as a measure of national power, more or less on a par with military power these days, geoeconomics, economic statecraft, we now have to worry about whether actions that we might take to support the United States, how Beijing will respond to these, and the threat of economic coercion. So if the United States, if Australia wants to give unqualified support to the United States for various actions, particularly on issues that are sensitive to China, then it needs to think twice about how this will affect its relationship with its biggest trading partner. So that's the standard lecture. So I'm probably not telling you things that are new, but perhaps just structuring them in a new way, offering a fresh perspective. Yeah. So the big question is, we've had these, this traditional or this original or conventional ledger in our minds as sort of durable assumptions up till now. But under Trump and under the increased effects of the structural power shift, things are changing. So In terms of the Trump presidency, the American first policies that he's enunciated are generally harmful to Australian interests: protectionism, withdrawal from the TPP, withdrawal from the Iran deal, Harrison, the list goes on, right? But none of these are actually beneficial really to Australia. Most are harmful in the sense that, they undermine the liberal international order on which Australia depends for its overall kind of security and prosperity. And of course, even worse, Trump has castigated allies and called US security guarantees into question, which has created a sense of panic in Canberra, Tokyo and other allies as to whether or not the United States is still a credible security guarantor. So this has created some, a lot of a need for kind of new thinking in relation to alliance management. And then in the background to this sort of, she said, these storms on the surface that Trump has created, then we're seeing an increasing structural power shift as the US retrenches, the end of the rebalance to the Indo-Pacific, and China's power and influence, military power and so forth, keep rising. And of course these debates are widely covered by people like Hugh White and others in his recent quarterly essay, Asia Without America. So basically, this is the worst of both worlds for US allies like Australia. We now have an ally that we really need to depend upon, but we're not sure if we can. That ally is also relatively declining. At the same time, we have to face a very powerful trading partner that doesn't share the same international rules of the road, the liberal international order that we wish to adhere to. So this is that timing. So now I'll just spend the last part of the presentation telling you a little bit about how I think this this standard ledger has been transformed because of the Trump issue and the China structural trend. So loyalty, perhaps our foremost asset, traditionally speaking, up till now, I think that has become weaker under Trump. I don't think it really counts much in Trump's mind, depending on how much he's actually aware of Australia. Apparently, he's supposedly educated or briefed on how much of a loyal ally Australia was, but I haven't really sort of seen any massive kind of validation of that from him. I mean, where Turnbull would sort of grovel that we were joined at the hip with the Americans, he didn't get much back in return in terms of sort of equal gushing rhetoric. Military contribution, I think this may be more important under Trump because and the regional strategic environment we face, because we're increasing our defence budget to 2%. That keeps Trump happy, right? That is the NATO benchmark, and that's what he's been arguing for. So we're doing our bit there. We're bulletproof, if you'll pardon the expression, from being criticised by Donald Trump for not doing enough for our own defence. This goes on to defence and economic collaboration. Again, we're spending most of the money that we've allocated to defence acquisitions with US companies. Again, Trump is looking at this as how can we extract economic benefit from our allies, from our partners, and so again this would seem to satisfy him. Now, regional networking has also become much more important, especially with the advent of this concept of the Indo-Pacific, the idea that Australia is at the crossroads of these two great oceans, and that this is the kind of the geopolitical pivot point of the region now. Actions such as the participation in the Quadrilateral Strategic Dialogue, or the Quad, alongside the Trilateral Strategic Dialogue, are very much welcomed by policy planners in the United States, and Trump has obviously endorsed it, endorsed the Quad and the Free and Open Indo-Pacific. But for those that really do the strategic planning within the the State Department and the military and so forth, Australia's geographic location has become never so important as in during the Second World War. And the American presence in Australia has also become more valuable as a way that the United States can train its forces for interoperability in the Northern Territories with Australia, but also use this as a perch from which to surveil the junction of the Indo-Pacific, and also to informally engage with Southeast Asian and South Pacific partners as well. And again, as a sub-region of the Indo-Pacific, the South Pacific has become increasingly important. We've had the Pacific step up, and Americans, I was talking to an American official the other week, and they were saying they're much more interested in the South Pacific now that we've seen moves towards an extension of Chinese influence there. So what Australia can do by itself, with the United States, with Japan, but towards the objectives of the United States, common allied objectives, these things have really grown in importance. In terms of convergent threat perceptions, this is a little more tricky to determine. So sort of a mixed picture here. The United States advocated a more confrontational approach to China under the Pence speech that was given at the Hudson Institute a while back. And the National Security Strategy or National Defence Strategy declares that US allies must demonstrate the will to confront shared threat. So that means the United States expects Australia to endorse its ideas of what's a threat in the region. But Australia's a little more ambivalent about playing China as a threat, and there's a lot of kind of discussions internally within Australia, and it's in the newspapers all the time about whether there is really a threat and how to deal with it and so forth. So Australia's a bit ambivalent about this. Of course, it hasn't agreed to join the United States in freedom of navigation operations within the 12-mile nautical mile exclusion zone of Chinese features in the South China Sea, which gives you a sort of perhaps a little bit of an indicator of how far Australia is prepared to go. In terms of ideological or domestic compatibility, I'd say this has seriously taken a hit. The America First policies of the Trump administration really kind of disrupt this heretofore important asset. It disturbs the core values that are at the heart of ANZUS and the departure of American stewardship from the liberal world order. This has harmed Australia badly. It's very difficult to show your value as a good international citizen to an administration that is basically not endorsing or even walking away from that role and is a bad international citizen even. And a lot of these policies are harmful to the US, and it's very difficult to deal with a president like Trump. We think of the fractious phone conversation with Malcolm Turnbull, on which the relationship got off to a terrible start, and so we can see there's some problems there. Okay. And by the way, these negative effect, positive effect, or largely unaffected, it's more complex than just a simple up or down. I mean, you have to sort of unpack some of these things, and so this is what I can do here with that today. So power asymmetry probably hasn't changed that much. The President of the United States looks at alliance relations purely in transactional or material terms. One of the things I think the lack of alliance institutions and infrastructure has really revealed that depending upon personal, head of government to head of government relationships, which work very well under Howard and Bush and under Biden and Obama. We can see the problem with this now because we don't have fabulous relations between the two premiers. And premiers of allied capitals have had to start to learn how to manage Trump. This is a new skill, the use of quarantine, or you have to persuade or something. So this has really thrown back should we say the locus of allied interaction upon working level connections as opposed to head government to government relations. So Australia has now said, well, it's difficult to talk to Trump, and to get our points across and for him to appreciate this. So we need to step down. We need to go down to more able and more stable elements of the deep state. So we're looking at the US bureaucracy, the State Department, Congress members, military defence, intelligence organisations, think tanks, alliance managers, among whom, of course, the Australian alliance remains highly valued and supported. So there's sort of a little bit of hope in the 2018 National Defence Strategy that I think Mattis obviously had a hand in this and said alliances are incredibly important. So now we've got a situation where we have to bypass Trump in order to manage the alliance. So the second point is we further deepened our sunk costs into the alliance, thereby deepening this liability. Australia really just doesn't have anywhere else to go than the alliance with the United States in terms of its national security, in terms of its national defence. That's because we want to double or triple our defence budget. So Paul Bibb says, we have no credible defence future without the US alliance. So we're basically, we're entirely dependent upon this. We've sunk everything into it, and our options are limited. And then lastly, this problem of complex economic interdependence has only got more problematic. And you can see some instances of Australia deviating from its overall support to the United States through joining the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and leasing Darwin's commercial port to a Chinese contractor. So we've seen that Australia is prepared to do things in its economic interest that its strategic ally is not necessarily highly supportive of. On the other hand, of course, this has been disrupted by the more recent revelations of Chinese sharp power against Australia and influence operations, which have given Canberra a rethink about the desirability of getting too closely integrated economically with China. And so we saw the prohibition of Chinese telecom suppliers like Huawei and the ZTE in supplying Australia's 5G networks, for example. So that's also kind of a little bit of a mixed picture, but maybe a deepening liability as well. So assets that outnumber liabilities, numerically 6-3, right? But as I said right at the start, it's very difficult to actually sort of weight these individual categories and say, well, this one is stronger or this one is weaker. So in reality, the assets and the liabilities are all interconnected and interactive, and also contextual. So it's impossible to definitively measure these. So they have to be a sort of a mind map as opposed to very much a scientific result. Traditional assets such as loyalty and ideological domestic compatibility have been seriously weakened under Trump. He places a higher premium on military and economic values and what the US can actually extract from ANZUS. Wants to get something back. Threat perception is more ambivalent. So US primacy and regional order competes with the notion of complex economic independence, but then that's undermined by the use of sharp power. So the common threat perceptions are a little bit sort of muddy or murky, especially in comparison to the Cold War, where these things were virtually a given that there was complete agreement. Also, it's worth noting that when it comes to supporting the United States, it clashes with China. The costs are going to be much higher and much more risky for Australia than, say, when Australia said, okay, you're going to invade Iraq, all right, we can contribute something to that. that's a completely different scenario to joining the United States in a conflict around the Taiwan Strait, for example. I mean, that's a much more serious scenario. And then lastly, the lack of alliance infrastructure and the dependence on the personal executive level relations has become a major liability under Trump, because we just haven't got this level of bonhomie and so forth, and mateship that we've seen between previous Premier Dianes in the past. Okay, last one, please. So, what are the implications going forward to try and draw something out of this analysis? Well, some people have said, well, all we need to do is survive the 4-year Trump abomination and hope things return to normality. And this would mean that the ledger that I presented originally becomes more re-established. We return to something more closely approximating that. Right? In the meantime, we just sort of bypass Trump and we reinforce our relations with the deep state and perpetuate the good relationships, structural relationships that we always had, and that we can return to that will start functioning properly under a new premier. And we continue to maintain the US strategic position in Asia, even if Trump isn't supporting it, we will, only partially supporting it. So, we collaborate more with Japan and so forth to uphold the rules-based order, even if the United States is partially able. We also need to cooperate with Japan as well, just to spread our liabilities and to diversify our options. We need to come up with a plan B. Secondly, we might need to think, well, what if Trump becomes the new normal, right? Either by a second term or the victory of another populist or similar type president to Trump. We'll have to completely rethink that the old ledger, is going to be left behind, and the greatly adjusted new ledger is going to become the new facts of life. And we'll have to start getting used to paying much more in terms of defence costs and contributions going forward to service those the new prioritising of assets. And then lastly, one of the things I think we need to do is to overhaul the alliance structure. We need to somehow fabricate a stronger alliance infrastructure, formalisation, so they can be better insulated against dependency upon problematic presidencies and personal relationships. Okay, final slide, please. So, thank you very much indeed for your attention, and look forward to all of your questions and any suggestions for improvement or adjustment. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.